Welcome to Waiting on the Trade, a comics book club for people who can't keep up with monthly comics. I'm Matt Ledger.
I'm Patrick Fitzgerald Fleck.
And I'm Monte Nelson.
This month, we're talking about X-Men, Worst X-Man Ever, a standalone 5-issue miniseries written by Say Anything frontman Max Bemis and illustrated by Michael Walsh. Now, in case you need a refresher, Worst X-Men Ever is the story of Bailey Hoskins, a mutant whose power is that he can blow himself up. But just the once, because then he'll be blown up and dead. As Bailey enters the X-Men's world, readers get to experience the world through his eyes, with some knowing nods to continuity and past stories along the way. I'm really impressed I made it through that intro. I've been forgetting words all day.
It's really good. So
I know, right? So we'll get down to our discussion points in a minute, but first I wanted to welcome our first actually new guest host in a while to the podcast. Monte, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome, Monte.
Thank you.
Monte is 1/3 of the SJW Comics Book Club, which is a podcast that we are friends with. And he is here for part 1 of our epic crossover. Monte, do you want to tell the people a little bit about the SJW Comics Book Club?
Yeah, so it's a podcast that I do with 2 of my friends, Veronica and Melissa. We've been friends basically since middle school, and eventually we just decided to start talking about comic books and record ourselves doing it. I'm not really sure why. We just thought the world needed more of our opinions, I guess.
It's basically the conceit of this podcast, too.
Yeah. So we try to approach comics from like a progressive standpoint and a social justice standpoint, but we really do mostly focus on the stories rather than just like a bunch of really in-depth discussions of social issues, although that definitely happens. There'll be some episodes where we just talk completely about the story and nothing about that. So yeah, we release episodes once a week, and it's a good time.
So jealous of your guys' ability to
Once a week. Oh my gosh.
We don't have that kind of fortitude here at Waiting on the Trade headquarters.
There once was a time.
Yeah.
But no, yeah.
It does get a little bit hectic, and we might eventually scale it back a little bit. But right now, I think we've been going for about a year and a half, and we've been able to keep it up. So
Nice. Yeah, congrats.
Yeah, and I've listened to quite a few episodes of the podcast and would definitely recommend it to people who enjoy this podcast, which is the reason we're doing the crossover event in the first place. So you guys release weekly and you talk about a lot of books. What made you want to bring X-Men Worst X-Men Ever over here instead of saving it for your guys' podcast?
So I guess one of the core like things about our podcast is that I read a lot of comics, at least Marvel comics. So I'm a little bit familiar with like the characters and continuity and stuff, especially X-Men. And Veronica and Melissa didn't really read comics all that much before we started the podcast. So it just seemed like because it is so Easter eggy, I guess you could say, it just seemed like it wouldn't really fit very well with our show and what we do there. So
yeah, I could definitely see that, given that there's a lot of like wink wink nudge nudge in this one, right? Like there's a lot of hey, do you get the joke? So, and I'm curious as we go through, because like the way I think I would stack our X-Men knowledge probably before we have a discussion is probably you at the top, Monte, then me, and then Pat. So I'm interested to see which jokes Pat and I especially didn't get. So we'll see. But I think I cut.
Well, now I am super nervous.
No, don't be nervous. No, like I got
most of them.
I overall like the book. So sometimes up top we're just like, hey, did you like the book or not? I liked the book. I think I might have liked the art more than the story, but I liked both for sure. Pat, did you like the book?
I too enjoyed the book, yes.
So there we go. Don't be nervous.
Yeah, I guess, Monte, where did you start with your X-Men knowledge? Which was your first X-Men comic you got into?
The think the first one that I ever like the first actual comic that I read was probably something from Claremont. Um,
Mm.
like his first run, the classic Claremont run, not the Extreme X-Men or the other stuff that came later. But I think my actual introduction to it, like my introduction to the team wasn't in the comics, it was the animated series.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, which I was a really big fan of when I was a kid. And then there were also the movies that came out in the early 2000s. And I don't
Mhm.
think I actually started reading the comics until after both of those. So after I had watched the animated series and the movies. And then
Sure.
eventually I was like, I'll actually start reading the comics because it's actually interesting. So one of my co-hosts, Veronica, she also like she has quite a bit of background about comic book characters because she used to read the wikis and like summaries of the things that would happen without actually reading the stories. And that's kind of what happened with X-Men. Like I had several, so after I had seen the animated series and I had several like encyclopedia style books of like the different characters and the things that had happened and stuff, and like collections of art without the stories, like character designs and stuff.
Sure.
So I would like read those things and look at those things without actually reading the stories. And I don't think I actually started reading the comics until like high school, which was probably like 2008, 2009. So
Nice. Yeah, I had a bunch of those. Like, I think they were like the visual encyclopedia or whatever. I think DK was a publisher
mhm.
that put a bunch of those out, and like I had the X-Men one and the Spider-Man one and the Batman one, and those were all very cool. Like the Batman one had like a cutaway of the Batcave. That was one of my favorite things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely like am in the same boat. I think of having read around a bunch of the X-Men stuff without having read it. Like I know the X-Men went to
Mhm.
Australia and then like went through the Siege Perilous, and I've never read those comics ever in my life. So
Well, you probably shouldn't.
they're
I love the
terrible.
X-Men, but I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like all of the stories are great.
Oh no! If you've
No,
got a history as long as the X-Men, there's no way they're all bangers. There's no way.
no. As long as
Yeah.
51% of them are good, right?
Yes. I do think most of them are good. And the ones that are good are very, very good. So,
Right.
at least to me.
So you said in your discussion notes that this has just been kind of on your list of X-Men comics to read for a while. Like, where did you hear
Mhm.
about this book?
I don't even really know. It just seems like it's all like it's just been in the background for a very long time. I couldn't even tell you where I like first heard of it or anything, but like I would see it on Reddit. Um, there's other podcasts that would mention it. People would recommend it to me, but I just never. It was just you have that. It's like the white whale. Like you have that thing that you know you should do or you know you should get and you just but once you like now I've read it, so now it's been read, it's
Yep.
done, it's over. So I guess I was just putting that off for as long as possible, but this seemed like the time.
And he wept because there were no more X-Men comics left to read.
Exactly.
No, I asked because I had kind of the same or a similar experience, not so much as like seeing it other places, but when you mentioned the Reddit thing, like I see panels and pages from this book pop up on Reddit all the time. It feels like it's a very Redditable comic. Like people will pull out that Xavier page where he's talking about the dream, or they'll pull out like the montage page where Bailey's hanging with X-Force and stuff. Like there's a lot of like X-Men meme panels I think that end up on comic book Reddit. So that's
Yeah.
definitely where I had found and heard about it and like generally had a favorable opinion about it because those seemed fun. So Pat, did you know anything about this book before you picked it up?
I knew nothing. I hadn't heard of it at all. But yeah, it's a good ride. Okay, this is the question that I have. Would you give this to someone who doesn't have much knowledge of the X-Men to begin with?
No. Absolutely not.
Okay, well, Matt has an answer right away. There you go.
Well, actually, I thought about that. Like, that was the first thing I wrote in my discussion notes. Actually, it was like, I don't think I would give this to a new X-Men fan, even though I think it's kind of trying to like work as a story that is for people who aren't that familiar with the X-Men?
Yeah, I mean, how are you classifying new X-Men fan, I guess?
So that's a good question, actually. So, like, if you're someone who's in Monte's shoes, where like you've seen the animated series and you've seen the movies, like maybe then yes, I would give
I think
this
that's
to you.
probably enough. I think the movies give you enough base knowledge to like recognize the characters.
But like at the same time, you're not going to know who the Purifiers are. You're not going to know who Quentin
I don't know
Quire
who the
is. Like,
Purifiers are.
yeah, I know, but like, who did you think those people in the black suits with the white crosses were in issue 2 or whatever that was? I think that was issue
The one
2.
with the Sentinels? I don't know, just bad people.
Yeah, it's probably fine.
Just bad guys.
They don't have X's, they have
Yeah.
crosses. They're bad.
Yeah, I think that I probably would suggest. I don't think I would suggest it to someone who has never read comics, period, or who has like no knowledge of who the X-Men are at all.
Sure.
But even if you just have like a cursory knowledge, like, so I think that the actual like story uh, behind all the jokes in this is relatable enough that it would resonate with anyone. I'm not saying it's like the best story ever written or like it's super profound or anything. But I think that the story would resonate with people enough, and the book itself is enough fun, like outside of the Easter egg jokes, that I probably would, even if you only have like a passing knowledge. I
So,
don't know.
what if we set the bar at if you know enough about Cyclops to understand why the book is making fun of him, then you
I mean,
can read the
literally,
book.
have you seen any of the films or like seen Cyclops in the comics at all? That's all you need. Just
You
one.
know enough about the book to know why the book is making fun of him, but not enough about Cyclops to be mad that the book is making fun of him, which is what my opinion is. And I do agree with your point, Monte, that the story itself is good enough and like the story connects with you enough that it carries you through the rest of it, and it doesn't really matter whether you get the jokes on most pages, I think. So
And the story itself works on different levels, right? Like the base story is an outsider feeling like an outsider, even when he's a rebel. Like he's the rebel of the rebels, basically. He doesn't fit anywhere. But at the same time, you can see another layer of it sort of poking fun at the trope of X-Men and the mutant being rejected from society kind of thing. But you don't need to necessarily see it that way. You could just see it as the base. This kid is trying to find a place for himself, and even with mutants, he's not finding a place, and that's very relatable, like you said.
yeah,
Yeah.
I do really love that bit. It's early on in the book when he's talking to his parents about being a mutant, and he's like, "Oh yeah, the X-Men. I know them. Like, they're great. They shoot lasers out of their eyes." And like, that would kind of be what teenagers think about mutants in the Marvel universe, right? Like, mutants are supposed to be this like crazy ostracized group, but like the X-Men are the public face of mutants in the Marvel universe, and X-Men are really cool. It turns out. So that was an
Yeah.
interesting panel.
I actually, so this is something that I was really kind of, well, I was not really. Let me walk that back. I was kind of excited to talk about. Um I don't want to get too crazy, and
Sure,
yeah.
no.
It's your
But
first appearance. You can save really for second.
yeah. I'll come back a few times before I get into reallys and berries and all those. But so with that panel in particular, because I think Matt, you brought it up in your notes as well. Um, and I thought it was so interesting because like it's kind of the same way that Americans at least relate to all kinds of marginalized groups. You know, you have the, like, just use black people for example. Like you have the black people who are notable, and you know everybody loves Beyonce. Everybody thinks, you know, certain rappers are like super cool, and kind of set culture. But then at the same time, a lot of people will have disdain for the black people that they interact with in their daily life, like just the normal, not wealthy, not public, not notable black people. And I feel like I don't think that it's necessarily intentional in the X-Men, at least not for every writer, for them to be using that as an allegory, but I think it does work really well, and it always makes me think of that. Just like the way that you can have a certain group of marginalized people who are held up and considered to be like the pinnacle of what people aspire to be. But then at the same time, you can have, like the Morlocks. Nobody wants to be a Morlock, or the freaks in Mutant Town when that was a thing. Nobody wanted to be them. So I think it's interesting, and it's something that like also wasn't really in the original X-Men stories and has kind of developed over time and become more and more of a thing. And I think that it makes the allegory that people often think of when they think of the X-Men apply so much more. Just to have that distinction between the cool mutants and the uncool mutants that everyone hates or pities or is disgusted by.
Yeah, and like Bailey very tellingly thinks that he's gonna be a
The
Beyonce
cool ones.
mutant. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
like
a
he's
Beyonce
very much closer to a Morlock, right?
Yeah.
Well,
So
reading this, I always thought of Beak, right, from EU is for extinction. And I'm glad they actually makes a
Mhm.
cameo in this. I think he's being sworn in as president. I don't know. It's
yeah, it
great.
looked like.
I was all for it. Him and Angel showed up. I was like, yeah. But like, yeah, when they're talking about the worst X-Men ever, it's like, I don't know. I think Beak is technically one of the X-Men. That poor guy.
He can actually like kind of use his mutant power and not die though, Pat.
Not really. Well, yeah, not die, sure, but like he can maybe glide for a little bit, but it takes a lot of effort, and he'll probably break a bone or two.
Peck at people.
Beak's the best. I don't want to talk too ill about Beak because he's awesome.
Yeah, I do think this comic does a good job of exploring the allegory in a way that, like you were talking about, Monte, sometimes X-Men comics do it very consciously and do it very well, and sometimes X-Men comics just like somehow completely whiff on it too. I think this one falls into the former camp more than the latter.
Yeah. And you never know, what the intent of the author is necessarily, but I would like to think that it was intentional, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Like another thing about the book that felt really interesting to me and like made it feel like Bemis was in control of what he was doing the whole time is the fact that it tonally kind of goes up and down throughout. Like it's very funny and it's very depressing and then it's very fun. Like it's mostly lighthearted. And I think in my notes I described it as brash and I think you Monte had it as plucky and I think both of those are accurate. But like it also has that scene where Bailey's parents get stomped to death by a sentinel and like
It's a blood spatter.
it's a
It
very
stays
dark
there.
humor. Yeah.
Yep.
Yes. It really does set the tone and lets you know that this is going to be a story that portrays the X-Men differently than other stories do. Just the way that, that happens in the middle of this fight. And yeah, the X-Men are busy doing other things, but like I don't think does anyone acknowledge that happens or try to get him away from the Sentinel or
Beast
anything
goes
like
Beast
that?
goes up
Bailey,
to him.
actually, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, most of the other X-Men are just doing their thing.
Yeah, Wolverine's busy screaming, die, die, die.
Which is great. That I always love just Wolverine slashing at a Sentinel is one of the best things. It's great.
Always pretty good.
Also, Wolverine cursing like
Cursing is so good.
just about every speech bubble with Wolverine is censored in some way, which is funny.
That's great.
Yeah, I think that like that Bailey's parents getting stomped to death by a sentinel scene really does let you know like what kind of book you're in for. Like you don't see a lot of people stomped to death by sentinels in like mainline X-Men books. So it kind of sets the tone of hey, there are stakes here and also this is kind of the dark humor and like tone we're playing with. I guess are there other high points in the book that you guys wanted to discuss? Like what were some of your favorite moments in the book?
I mean, I love whenever they made fun of Cyclops. Okay, not
Get
every
out of
time.
here, Pat. Go
Not
home.
every time. The first time I thought it was amazing. It was the panel that made me crack up the hardest. It was right after it's the scene where they're playing baseball at the academy and they're just like, oh, this is one of the rare instances where the world isn't in peril, where we can just live a normal life. Isn't it great? And we're all the like super attractive mainline X-Men. And Bailey shows up like, oh, you can't be here. You haven't been on Jimmy Kimmel enough or whatever. And it's Cyclops. And the next panel on the next page just cuts to Bailey in front of Magneto saying, okay, yes, I've thought about it. It's going to blow up Cyclops. Oh, I laughed so hard.
To be fair, as a guy whose favorite X-Men is Cyclops, that page is still really funny. Or that bit is still really funny.
Oh my God. I was like, yes. Exactly. He would have blown himself up to make Scott
To make
shut
a
up.
point. And so let's just get all three of them out of the way right now, quick. There's the Slim is not always right on the blackboard with Wolverine when he's going on
Oh, I
about
didn't even
traders.
catch that one. Nice.
Yeah, and then there's the worst X-Men ever table where Cyclops somehow gets sat down with Maggot and Joseph, which, whew, Joseph, that's a thing I could have not been reminded happened.
Yeah, we actually did a season on SJW Comic Book Club that was all about Magneto. That was the story that I chose, or the theme that I chose for the season. And we had two stories, I think, with Joseph in them. And he's one of my least favorite characters. And then my actual least favorite character ever in X-Men is Astra, who appears alongside him in both of those stories. So it was
Oh
rough
boy.
to get through.
So
Yeah,
you hurt yourself with your own theme there a little
Just
bit.
double down.
I did. I picked the stories, but um, it backfired on me.
I'm scrolling ahead to see who else is at that worst X-Men ever table quick.
Well, there's a fourth time that Scott is made fun of, or Cyclops is made fun of and it's during the Sentinel fight, and the page where Beast is like comforting Bailey, which it seemed like he was taking him away from the battle, but then he just doesn't, and they just kind of sit there, which is
Kind of
fine.
hugs
Like
him
he's
there, yeah.
comforting him. Yeah. But in the background, you see Scott like blasting the leg of the Sentinel, and then he just strikes a pose in the next page for absolutely no reason because he hasn't moved at all. He just decided to strike a pose. And I thought that was pretty funny.
Seems correct, honestly.
But I also think that I wouldn't say that Scott is necessarily one of my favorite X-Men, but I do think that like the mark of a good X-Men story is how they deal with Cyclops. Like the best X-Men stories are the ones that really get into his psyche, I think.
How much of a loser he is? I agree. I agree. That's why Grant Morrison did it right.
I was trying to be diplomatic. Uh,
Well, let's get this out of the way. What's your top 3 X-Men characters?
um, I would probably say Storm, in my opinion. Storm is my favorite one just because she's always the one that I've resonated with. I think it's a little bit difficult to find stories that are really about Storm and that really get into her very well outside of like Claremont's run.
Sure.
Um, so yeah, I would say that she's definitely my number one. And then uh let's say 2 and 3, and this isn't in order.
Sure.
Um does Magneto count as an X-Man? Can I say he's an
Yeah. Oh,
X-Man?
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. He was
yeah.
the headmaster of the
Okay.
school at one point.
Like he's been an X-Man for a long time, but I feel like
Mhm.
when people think of Magneto, they definitely don't think of him as an X-Man. But I will say that I think that Magneto, after he like more permanently joined the X-Men, became a much more interesting character. So I'll say Magneto. And actually that is in order. Magneto is number 2.
Sure.
And then 3. So let's say 3 and 4. Tied for 3 and 4 are
Nice.
Psylocke and Rogue. Psylocke is just really cool. I understand that her backstory is very unnecessarily convoluted and silly and dumb and vaguely racist, but in my heart of hearts, I love her. So that's just the way it is. And then Rogue is just super fucking cool. Like Rogue's the
Can't
best.
argue that.
I was gonna say, I feel like people have done a lot of really interesting things with some of the problematic stuff in Psylocke's background. So like, not
Hmm.
all bad. Like it's let people have a lot of interesting like discussions on and off the page at least. So there's that.
Yeah. What about you guys? What are your top 3 X-Men?
Pat, you want to go first?
I'm gonna put you guys through what you just put me through.
Storm is up there for sure for me. Nightcrawler, I think, will probably be number 2.
Oh yeah, Nightcrawler's fantastic.
I'm a fan of Emma Frost,
Hmm.
so I think those 3 will be mine.
That's the real question. Emma Frost or Jean Grey? I feel like it says a lot about a person which of those two you gravitate towards.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting at this point that Cyclops is basically like, why not both in the comics? But I think I also prefer Emma, honestly. Just like, I think their relationship is so much more interesting because he's like very much the straight-laced Boy Scout for the most part, but like also like very much has to keep himself in check. And Emma is the other way where she would potentially be like probably a bad person, but has to keep herself in check. So like those two, like the fact that their personalities and like the inclinations of what they would do are so very different, but they have common like goals and like an attraction to each other is really interesting to me. I really like that relationship. So
Like Emma, despite her poor taste in men. So
yes.
I So, okay, I like both Emma Frost and Jean Grey. I probably also prefer Emma Frost, just because I think Jean is really cool, and I think it's interesting that like both Emma and Jean have the same kind of internal conflict. Like both of them have that pull towards doing bad things or doing things that you might consider bad. With Emma, it's internal. Like with Jean, it comes from an external force because it's the Phoenix, but like that's also a part of her, and a part of her like desires and what she wants to do. So I think it's interesting that they both have that pull, but because of their backgrounds, like one of them, Jean, is considered a lot more of a traditional hero, just because I think honestly she's just more practiced at practicing self control, whereas Emma, she, with the backstory of that character, she's had to kind of indulge in the negative aspects of her personality or the antisocial aspects of her personality, I guess we'll say. So I think they're really interesting. And I do think also that it's interesting that both of them have had their lives destroyed by Scott Summers. So
yes.
So my favorite X-Men, Cyclops.
my favorite X-Man, the Woman Destroyer, uh, the man who sucks the life out of every woman around
He's
him.
good at one thing, and it's leading the X-Men, and sometimes he's not even good at that. But he tries so damn hard, Monte. He tries so damn
Yeah,
hard.
he does. And it's not I like shitting on Scott. I think that it's funny, but that I think that people should acknowledge that like he was set up to be what he is. Like he could not have really turned out any other way than how he is. And I think given like his backstory and stuff, he's done a pretty good job of being a decent person.
Nice.
Question mark.
Nice. No,
He's okay.
I think especially since like since Xavier's been less of a going concern in the X-Men or was for a while until the House of X, Powers of X stuff, like that era where Cyclops is basically the de facto like not just leader of the X-Men but like leader of the mutant race is so interesting to me to watch him like make choices that Xavier wouldn't have made for different reasons to the point where Magneto even comes to him when they're on Utopia and is like, "Hey, I want to be part of what you're doing here because it seems really interesting and cool." So I think there's a lot to be said about like Scott's abilities as a leader and ability to work outside of the person he is to become the person he should be. But I wrote a blog post about that and I'll put it in the show notes. So
Of course you will.
yeah, I mean, we gotta have show notes now because I gotta put this blog post in there so everyone can learn why Cyclops is the best X-Man. But number two, I think would be Kitty Pryde. Really like Kitty.
I always forget about Kitty Pryde until someone mentions her, and I'm like, oh yeah, Kitty Pryde is dope.
What's the
Same
thing?
with
Like
Jubilee.
you guys were going through your list, and I was like, oh, those people should probably be on my list. But like they're not because there's these other people. Ugh, there's so many good X-Men. That's the
So
problem.
many.
Yes.
But I was never more. I was definitely always more of a Kitty Pryde person than a Jubilee person, even having grown up with the cartoon.
Well, she's got the pet dragon, so she's got that going for her. Who's number 3 for you, Matt?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, I was just trying to narrow it down. That's so tough, you
Deadpool. No, I'm
guys.
just kidding.
Well, absolutely not. It might be Nightcrawler. Actually, I think it's probably Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler's pretty good.
He's a cool guy.
And like kind of actually has to live the mutant dilemma more than a lot of other X-Men, where they all just look like normal hunky people
Oh
anyways.
no,
Like,
we're hot-looking people. It's so hard.
Yeah, he was the first one introduced with like a physical, like that was, well, no, I mean Angel technically because of his wings, but that's like easy to conceal, or at least it was never a problem to conceal it, I guess we'll say.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, even from like issue 1 or 2 or whatever, he was just walking around with them under a trench coat, right?
yeah. I think Nightcrawler was the first one who was actually like physically different from normal people, and that was a part of his, a part of his character,
Yeah, yeah, I don't know
which
if Beast had
elevated
already
the
become
stories.
Mhm.
I don't know if Beast had already become blue by then or not, but it doesn't really matter so much because I don't think that was even an X-Men at that point.
Yeah, he had become blue, but he wasn't an X-Man. He wasn't in those
Yeah. Which, while
stories
we're on
at
the
that
topic of
by
Beast,
then.
this book has some good Beast in it, so that was nice.
Yes. So you put in your notes that you hate Modern Beast.
Oh,
Um
Modern Beast is the worst. Modern Beast might be my least favorite
why?
X-Man. He's so bad.
Why?
He's a war criminal. Also, he disagreed with
Why
Scott,
though?
so you're right there
Oh,
with
there we
me.
Oh,
go. There it is.
okay.
No, but like I was talking to Pat about this before we started. Modern Beast is like so reckless that he brought the original 5 X-Men out of time to the present time just so he could like say, "Hey, look, Scott, you screwed up," instead of
I mean, did
like
Scott
standing
really
by his
need to know that
word.
he screwed up? Because I mean, sometimes you just gotta
I mean,
let
it's
Scott know.
possible. And at the same time, I think in recent issues of X-Force, Beast basically genocided a race of, oh, what was it? It was like it was some sort of like not quite humanoid like race that Beast just basically like was like, "Oh yeah, they're dead now." It's like, "Oh, okay, Beast." Like he's made so many bad choices recently that he's basically unsavable. Now I'm looking up why is Beast the worst. Hang on. But Monte, you clearly disagree.
Well, no, so my concept of Beast is it kind of stops, I guess, at Wolverine and the X-Men. So as you bring up these other things that have happened more recently, I'm like, oh yeah, he did do that. Yeah, he did that too. Um, yeah, that was a mistake.
Yeah, it is
So
more. It is a relatively recent phenomenon that Beast is the worst because Beast was one of my favorite X-Men in the cartoon too. Like, I like nerdy Beast. I like Beast saying big words, but I'm
Kelsey
just
Grammer? Who doesn't like Kelsey Grammer? Come on.
there is also the bit I'm scrolling through an article that is literally titled "The 10 Worst Things That Beast Has Ever Done" on Comic Book Resources right now. And
Nice.
there was the bit in New X-Men where he pretended to be gay, which was, I'm sure, actually just an editorial decision that they forced Morrison to walk back. But
Wait, does they? I didn't even know they walked that back. I got to reread it, I guess.
yeah, he walks that back by the end of that run. He's talking to Scott, and Scott's
yeah,
like, "Dude, you're not gay though, right?" And Beast is
I
like,
think
"Well,
it's
yeah,
like
but you know."
literally the same. It's like literally the same story arc, I think. Like
Yeah, it might
it's
be by the end of
only
that story. Yeah, Beast is no good at this point.
Yeah, I
Which is
wouldn't
why I
I
love
wouldn't
seeing
necessarily
Beast in
say
this
he's one
one.
of my favorites, but
Oh, I was just saying it was nice to see him in this one, like portrayed in a way that felt accurate and good to me. Like it reminded me why I used to like Beast. So that was nice. And I think that's the thing that this series gets to do that's really interesting is it just gets to make its own versions of every single character. So it gets to be whatever Max Bemis thinks is the iconic version of each character and like Max Bemis's Cyclops sucks and Max Bemis's Beast is great and Max Bemis's Professor X is actually like really good, which that's another character that I know you wanted to talk about, Monte, who has maybe been put through the ringer in recent days.
yes, he most definitely has. Although I will admit that I haven't read like all of the Krakoa stuff because like I said, I use Marvel Unlimited, so I'm like 2 months behind on everything. Um, with like a few exceptions where I'll read recent stuff. But I feel like the Krakoa stories, at least up to where I am in them, um, do a pretty good job of characterizing Xavier as not a villain. It's still like I don't like Xavier as this Machiavellian sociopath. I don't understand. I think the decision to change the character in that way is so cruel and unnecessary. And I wish it hadn't ever happened. Xavier as a character, he was introduced as this, you know, father figure to all of these disadvantaged children, literally. You know, he founded a school so that he could keep kids safe who were mutants. He uses his wealth like over and over and over again to benefit mutants and like individual mutants, not even necessarily, you know, the way that Magneto would necessarily use his wealth, where he's trying to build this nation of mutants to rule over everyone else. He I just feel like Xavier's original character was so grounded in empathy. And then around when did Deadly Genesis come out? Like 2004, 2006, somewhere
That
around
sounds
there. It
right.
was
Yeah.
just, yeah, somewhere around there was just like this decision to be like, so you know, the character that had this endless well of empathy who was he made a lot of mistakes but was always trying to do the right thing. We're just going to take that second part out of his character and we're just going to say he made a lot of mistakes and that's it. He just makes mistakes. He doesn't have empathy. He doesn't care about people. He picked this group of children and just sent them to their death without a second thought. Like, that's it's so cruel.
It
And
sucks,
it
right?
doesn't,
And
yeah, and it doesn't even necessarily give an actual criticism of the character, because I feel like a good criticism of Professor Xavier focuses on like his hubris and his arrogance, where he thinks that he always has the answers. And even if you're an empathetic person, that, you know, is a dangerous way to be. So I feel like you don't have to remove the empathy from the character to make that criticism. In fact, I think it makes the criticism less meaningful if you just make him a bad guy.
yeah, it's so easy to look at a character like that who's supposed to be a good person who helps others and see like all the ways you could pick him apart. And that's not like you're right, that's not interesting. It's not super interesting to just be like, "Oh yeah, actually he's just a jerk with no shades of gray in there at all."
Yeah.
The thing that I kept thinking about in relation to that is there's these comics from around the time of the Onslaught era where I think it was a Scott Lobdell thing, which sounds right. They revealed that like Professor Xavier was secretly into Jean when she came to the school. It's just like that doesn't need that. That's nothing. Like what the heck? We
No,
don't need that. So like, and that's way before Deadly
no.
Genesis. So it's just it feels like such an easy button to like an easy button to push in the X-Men story generator is just Xavier is bad and it's not useful and it's not really great for the series.
Yeah. I think it definitely does kind of erode. Uh, there are a lot of things in recent times that I think have made X-Men stories a lot better. Things like Utopia, things like, as much as I hate to say it, focusing on Scott. But
Uh,
there are also a lot of things that have made the stories worse. And I think that so many writers being so eager to trash Xavier is one of those things. Like, just leave him alone. Like, if you don't want to write about him, then just, you know, don't. You don't have
Yeah,
to.
even Astonishing, which Xavier's in for like all of 2 issues, gets in on the Xavier dunking because it talks about the fact that
That's
he
the
had
danger, right?
yeah, he had Danger chained up in the
Yeah.
danger room as a sentient being.
I hate that storyline so much. I
Yeah, there's
really like Danger, and I like that it gave us that character, but and I like Astonishing overall. I think it's really great, but I could have done without that. I don't see why Xavier had to
right. He
know
could
that
have
it was
easily
going
just
on.
not known. You don't have to dunk on
Yeah.
him. Didn't have to go out of your way to do that. So
Because it's like all everybody has blind spots, and I think it would be so interesting to say, you know, here's this guy who does everything he can to do good things, but he also makes mistakes and they have disastrous consequences, you know. That's real. Like that's actually something that a lot of people can relate to. Not to say that there's not, you know, monsters in the world who do horrible things and don't care about it. or who do horrible things on purpose. But I think it's a lot more common to have people who are well intentioned, but they make these mistakes that have consequences they didn't expect. And if you're going to have a billionaire philanthropist, I think it's much more interesting to point out that he's completely tone deaf and doesn't actually know what normal people need because he's a billionaire philanthropist, uh, than it is to say, oh, but actually he's like this Illuminati type Machiavellian character who's just been pulling everyone's strings. That's kind of lame, I think.
Yeah, completely agree. But I think the Xavier speech in this might actually be my real favorite moment in the book because I think it's the most X-Men moment, if that makes sense. I think it does the best job of encapsulating like what the X-Men like as a group in the comics and like as a concept are about.
Yeah, it does. And that's also why I feel like in this story you really get the best version of a lot of the characters. Like the Jubilee that appears in this is the Jubilee that I remember from the animated series. And like you said, the Beast that's in this, who's empathetic and nerdy and all of those things, like he's the best version of that character. Um, and that's why I think that I would recommend this to someone to read, even if they're not deep in the lore of X-Men, because you get the best version of it. And then with the Xavier speech, like you said, you get what the X-Men at their core are about, which is just fighting for their survival.
I think I'm coming around on that point actually, where as long as you've like have a cursory knowledge, like the guy sitting in that wheelchair is Professor X, I think you're good to go. And the rest of it maybe you'll appreciate on a second read after you've read a bunch of X-Men comics.
Yeah, it could be like a gateway.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm coming around on that one. No, I was gonna say the one person that the comic dunks on that we haven't talked about yet is Gambit. We can all agree that the comic should dunk on Gambit, right? Because Gambit's just like deserves it.
Yeah, I feel like he's a character that was made to be dunked on. Like that's the point of him.
He's sleazy, just his
Yeah,
character.
he's a sleazeball. He's a big old sleazy dude.
Yeah, the book understands every single character in the book, which even if it's
Mhm.
poking fun at the characters, it knows enough about the character's core to know the best way to poke fun at them. So it's always like it's never even the digs on Cyclops are like they're not like this character is terrible. They're like they're still laughing kind of with him than at him. And the Gambit ones are the same way, I would say. So we haven't talked a lot about the art in the book. What did you guys
It's
think about
so
the art?
colorful. The colors. Oh my gosh. It's great. I think the style of art really fits the type of story that's being told. Like this is an X-Men story, but it's sort of like a parody of an X-Men story at the same time. And I think the loose style, the thicker lines and the bright colors really help illustrate that this is sort of don't take this super seriously. This is sort of like a fun romp through the X-Men universe. We're gonna poke fun at
Yeah, it's
Marvel
very
itself in
whimsical.
this. Yeah.
Yeah, and it does almost feel animated on some pages in a way that, again, if you're a person who's just coming at it because you watched the animated series in the '90s and then you wanted to pick up an X-Men comic you heard good things about, I don't think you'd be unhappy with this artwork, that's for sure. I was trying to look to see if I'd read anything else by Michael Walsh, and apparently I have read the Tom King, Gabriel Walta, and Michael Walsh Vision series from Marvel, but I don't remember Michael Walsh doing pages in that series, so that went well. But I had also looked at some pages from a Justice League Black Hammer miniseries he had done, and those look good. So I have to check out some more Michael Walsh stuff in the future.
Yeah, for sure.
On our podcast, we don't really talk about art very much just because like I feel like we usually just bring it up if we like it, and like how good it is, which, the art in this is great. Just because I don't really have the skills to talk about what makes it good. I just like know that it is. Like I know what I like when I read a comic book, but I don't really know how to explain why I like it.
That
It's
can be
just
super tough, actually. Like
yeah.
as a person who's written reviews and stuff, getting the right vocabulary for saying, "Hey, this is what I enjoy about this book. Like this is why this particular page works, like why the page construction works, the colors and the lines and all that. Like that can be a tough vocabulary to pick up for sure." So
Yeah, like story I get, layout I get, but as far as like the nitty-gritty of the art, it's hard to describe, but just all of that was to say that I do really like the art in this. I just don't really know how to explain why.
yeah, and I think that's fair. Like that's a valid reaction to have to a comic book for sure, right? And I think for most people, they'll be in the same boat. But I do think Pat's right that it very much matches the tone of the story. So whoever decided to pair
Yeah, it does.
these guys up, probably Jordan White, who's the editor in that last page
Oh, nice.
pitch thing, did a good it's a good pairing for sure. I think in the same way that Bemis puts together iconic versions of the X-Men in the story, Walsh gets to put together iconic versions in the art too. With a Cyclops suit that I don't think I've really ever seen before anywhere else, honestly. And like Jubilee's shirt with the pink X on it, I don't know if I've seen that anywhere else before, but all of those costumes feel like they could have come from somewhere else, which I think is a compliment.
And even Bailey and his design just fits who he is very, very well. I feel like you can look at him and kind of make a judgment about what his character is going to be like.
Yeah, Bemis does a really good job of making Bailey have enough personality traits for you to kind of know what he's about, but at the same time feel like an everyman or a reader insert character, so you can kind of go on this journey through with him through the X-Men's world.
Mm-hmm.
And we certainly haven't talked about Miranda enough because we've only mentioned her once. Miranda's great, right?
Yes.
I
Miranda.
liked her more before the twist at the end that she reveals that she is more than what she appeared to be.
You don't
But yeah,
like that Miranda's the reason that Marvel continuity like basically rolls forward
Miranda
every 10 years?
Miranda is the editorial division of Marvel.
You don't like that Miranda's the reason the Winter Soldier exists, Pat?
I'm not a
I
big fan
love
of Winter
it.
Soldiers, so no.
That's where I think the series goes a little bit too inside baseball, is when we start getting to stuff that's like outside
The
X-Men stuff
MCU.
entirely.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, I think if you're not with it, you go through those two panels and you skip them and you're fine. So no worries, but
I mean, to be fair, I think the ending of this comic lost me a little bit.
Yeah, I don't really know what happened. I didn't really understand exactly what was going on in the ending, but it's about the journey, not the destination.
Sure, yeah. I appreciate that Bailey made his choice finally. Like he decided to do something in the
Yeah.
end, but it felt really sudden to me. Like it just took Miranda saying, "I can't save this world," and he's like, "Okay, well then I'll do it." It's like, well, if you could have done that before Bailey, what were you
well,
up to?
he is dead now, sort of. This version of him is dead at least.
Well, he never
Yeah.
existed, right? Because Miranda made this story not be made. Is
Yeah.
what that last page tells us.
That's what that's what I was confused about was the last page. Like, does that mean that none of this actually happened? Like she reset it, or she was like, because she seems happy that it happened, but then also everything's being torn up as if she's undoing it. So I was just a little confused.
Yeah, I read it as she made Max Bemis' story just not be picked up. So this story of Bailey
Oh,
never gets made.
okay.
So like all the other X-Men who existed before this comic exists, but not Bailey or I guess Rags or Riches.
Yeah, the point I was confused about is why she needed to wait for him at all, honestly. Because
Yeah,
it
that whole
doesn't
thing
really
yeah, go ahead, sorry.
no, it just didn't really like it didn't make sense to me that he had to do something for her powers to work in this situation. I don't think it's really explained why that
He says
was.
it's embarrassing I can't.
Yeah, and that's it. And then after Bailey blows up Riches, Miranda says that's what she was waiting for, but
Why? But
I still don't
why?
know why. Yeah, which
Maybe she was just letting him finish his story, you know?
yeah,
There you go.
Like she could have done it the whole time, but she wanted to let him
Let the story play out.
Or let us read a complete
yeah.
story.
It's very kind of her.
Thank you, Miranda.
I did like the fact that the fact that the ending jumps to the future and it's a dystopia, and like the second page it says all X-Men stories end with the apocalypse, which is true, like a good
Yes,
majority of them.
they really do. I really liked how it went through and showed where everyone was, like what happened with the Hellfire Club, the Brotherhood, and then Magneto holding the sign "I was right first."
Yeah, next to
I love
Quentin. Yeah, yeah.
Ray just stole my shtick.
Yeah, because one of my biggest gripes with Grant Morrison's new X-Men series is the jump 500 years in the future. It's like, why? What's happening? I appreciate that Bemis made that connection in this too. It's like, well, all stories end in the apocalypse. So
I
there
mean,
you
if you're
go.
gonna do iconic X-Men story, you got to get a little bit of time travel in there. Surprised they didn't go to space at all.
Oh yeah, talking about that Wolverine scene where he's talking about traitors. I love that he takes the chalk and puts it on one of his claws. It's so good. Oh, it's the little things.
I mean, it is actually
Yeah.
like a lot of it's the little things. Like it's a fun book, and part of the reason it's fun is that we were kind of talking about this before we started, Pat, where it's kind of two books. It's the story of Bailey, and it's hey X-Men fans, here's all these jokes.
Yeah, I feel
Same
like Bailey's
time.
story is just a vehicle for a fun romp through poking fun at X-Men and Marvel, which
Yeah,
I'm
but at the
here
same
for.
time, well, at the same time, I think Monte is right too, where like you can't just write Bailey's story off. It actually is affecting and it's moving to the point where I think I'd put this in my notes too. I don't know if you guys have both seen it. Like they brought Bailey back in main Marvel continuity, like he exists. Yeah, I guess do you guys have any other points that you want to discuss? Otherwise, we can move this podcast over to the if you liked this, here's what you should read next portion of the podcast.
I
I
had
don't think I do.
one big glaring problem I had with this.
All right, hit me.
The word infinite and infinitesimal are opposite of each other in meaning.
All right,
And
back me up. Where do I need to be in the book?
and I feel like out of any character in the X-Men, Hank McCoy would know that. And so, on page 13, when he says, I'd like to remind you that there's an almost infinitesimal amount of power set variability at hand when he's trying to convince Bailey not to get overexcited. He meant infinite and not infinitesimal, because infinitesimal is very small.
I actually did notice that when I read through that. Now that you mention it, I had the same thing.
It's like,
I was like,
Hank,
okay,
come on.
it's fine. The rest of the Beast dialogue is good, so it's fine.
That's my only sticking point. But yeah, otherwise, great. It's a fun romp.
So Monte, you're the guest. We'll let you go
Yep.
first. Do you have any follow-up recommendations for people who enjoyed this book?
So I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I think Wolverine and the X-Men it has like a very similar kind of tone. It just reminded me a lot of it, especially the issues with Dupe that center Dupe. Like they're very self-referential, very like self-effacing and kind of poking fun at the medium. Um, so I think those would be things that people would enjoy if they enjoy this comic, or if they just enjoy the X-Men.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that that book has a lot of the same energy. I was just flipping through the first issue of that the other day, and that totally makes sense as a good recommendation. Pat, do you have a recommendation?
I mean, I'm going to keep pointing people towards my favorite X-Men comic and say read E is for Extinction. It's really fun until it jumps 500 years in the future, but don't worry about that. But tone-wise, I would probably say the Squirrel Girl stuff that we read earlier with Simon. I felt wasn't also like a reverent look at the ridiculousness of Marvel, but at the same time tells a decent story. So I'd say check those two things out.
Yeah, and similar art style in a way,
Yeah,
at least, with the Squirrel Girl stuff.
Yeah, not so much Frank Quitely, but the Squirrel Girl stuff. Yeah.
No, not so much Frank Quitely. My recommendation was going to be the Wade and Cassidy Astonishing X-Men run, which this is the second week in a row that I think I've
Why you got to
recommended.
keep bringing up the bad
I know.
people?
I think I've recommended a book by a creator that maybe you don't want to read their stuff currently. So again, your mileage may vary on that, but that X-Men run to me is also kind of similar in tone to this. It's not quite as brash and energetic as this or the Wolverine and the X-Men stuff, but I think it's in the same wheelhouse of if you have a cursory knowledge of the X-Men, you can start with that run and it understands the characters really well. And it's got like a POV character in Kitty Pryde in the same way this has Bailey in it. So again, if you're avoiding Joss Whedon stuff, I probably agree with you, but I already own it and it's on my shelf, so I think that is going to do it for this month's discussion of X-Men Worst X-Man Ever. As always, if you want to get in touch with Pat or myself, you can find us on Twitter as @WattPodcast. You can email us at waitingonthetrade@gmail.com, and you can read more comics-related goodness at mattreadscomics.com. Monte, what is the easiest place for people to find you and or SJW Comics Book Club?
Yeah, if you want to find the SJW Comic Book Club on social media, you can find us on Twitter or on Instagram at SJW Comics Cast, or you can email us directly at sjwcomicspodcast@gmail.com. And then if you want to find the podcast, you can just type in SJW Comic Book Club in Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts, and it should come up. I also have a solo podcast that I do called Project Sinister. That's just about the X-Men. And by the time this comes out, I should have uploaded a few episodes of that. So if you want to listen to that, then you can search that as well.
Oh, nice. We'll definitely check that out. Like I said, I've enjoyed all the episodes of SJW Comics Book Club that I've listened to, even though you guys have a higher opinion of Battle for the Cowl than you should.
Wait, did we?
So like you guys weren't really high on it, but like I'm very low on it.
Oh, yeah, I can see why from what I remember of it. I think, yeah, we were just kind of like meh about it.
Yeah. As a person who has feelings about each different Robin, I had feelings about each different Robin in that book, but
Oh, Matthew.
Monte, thank you for coming on to talk X-Men with us. It was a real treat. I'm really happy that we have started this epic crossover journey. And listeners, be on the lookout for part 2 in the SJW Comics Book Club feed.